listening to the Astral Hour. I'm your host, Astral Meadow. Join me as we take a glimpse into the mysterious. Welcome everyone. Today I'm joined once again with my friend Kimmie Haliburda. She is a medium, animal communicator, Reiki practitioner, Akashic record reader, and spiritual life coach. She is also an expert at candle intention work and energy manipulation. If you want to learn a little bit more about her, you can check out our previous episode, episode 47, where we focus mostly on animal communication and energy manipulation. But for this episode, we're going to get into the law of attraction. Welcome to the show.
Hello again.
It's so great to have you back on.
It's great to be here.
Yeah. So could you explain a little bit about what the law of attraction is for those who might have not heard of it?
So I can, but I want to, I will in a nutshell explain what it is, and then I'm going to give a framework in which to view it through. Okay. So I don't believe that there are coincidences. And I believe that the law of attraction, it is a force that is around us all the time. I know this sounds very woo-woo and probably a little cheesy, but the law of attraction is always working. People are constantly attracting whatever frequency they're aligned with. The law of attraction essentially states that you will attract whatever you magnetize to yourself. So for example, a very practical example is if you have a friend group that, of people with low, kind of lowly morals, right? Like maybe not the best group of people to be around, then you will likely continue to attract people like that. And it will probably affect how you view the world, and your own moral code might disintegrate or degrade because of being around people like that. That's the basic principle of the law of attraction. It's immaterial, but it can lead to very material outcomes depending upon the consistency of your own manifestation, which we'll talk about later. But in no video that I've ever seen on YouTube or any person that I've ever spoken with in the spiritual community, no one has ever set up the framework in which you really need to look at law of attraction. So it's really important to understand that we live in a 3D physical reality. We all have bodies. Most people have to go to work to sustain themselves. We all have bodies that can get sick. And there is an inequality in the world that doesn't allow for everyone to be able to attract what maybe other people in more privileged positions can. So it's really important to note that people will talk about the law of attraction and accumulating wealth or becoming healthy, but the latter speaks a lot about ableism and the blindness, I believe, in the spiritual community, that nobody wants to be sick, and no one wants to be poor, and no one wants to be treated as less than, but people have bodies that don't feel well. People of color are treated very poorly globally, and even in modern societies. We haven't gotten rid of institutionalized racism or systemic racism. All of these things are very, very important to keep in mind when you talk about the law of attraction. The LGBTQ community are not treated with love and respect the way that they should be on a global scale. So and that sounds, it might sound pessimistic to some people, but it's realistic. Those are real objective facts. Sexism, racism, ableism, you can't get away from that. And really, if you're born in one part of the globe, you'll have a very different experience than someone born in another part of the globe. No matter what, just all across the board, right? So when you talk about law of attraction, you have to keep that perspective in mind, or at least it's very helpful, because otherwise, I believe that can lead to spiritual bypassing, which we will also talk about later. Understand that life is very, very hard for a lot of people. Rent is very expensive. This doesn't have anything to do with any political agenda. These are just real facts. So, that being said, can you still attract positive and good things for yourself? Yeah, you can. But that is a framework in which to view the law of attraction and to view manifestation. There are things that everyone can do. There are techniques that well, you know what? Maybe not everybody, but a lot of people can use, even if it's like the power of the positive mindset. But there's also a limitation for a lot of the world in the different tools and resources and technologies that they can use. So we can talk about some things that are widely available, especially in the developed world, that you can use to help materialize those consequences of the law of attraction. And we will talk about more immaterial things as well that are more easily accessible to most people.
Right. It's interesting when you're talking about, like the people you're hanging around and things like that, because, I was raised in a very, emotionally abusive kind of family, and I accidentally fell into an emotionally abusive relationship like as soon as I turned 18, and I didn't have like money for therapy, and like it wasn't encouraged, and honestly I couldn't even see that the environment was toxic. I actually thought it was normal, and I think about it now that I went to therapy and I'm like, oh, this is abusive, this is toxic, but that was kind of a privilege as I got older, had my own job and like could work and afford it before I even realized, wow, this is bringing me down, and I'm literally attracting more toxicity. And it's not because I was a bad person. It's just because I didn't even recognize, that it wasn't normal or healthy, to be in those environments. And, once I got therapy and started realizing like, oh, wow, like I don't have to stay in this anymore. I kind of cleared, my therapist does energy work and things like that, started changing the way I viewed a healthy relationship, and started attracting healthier friends, better people, more supportive community. But, it is interesting. I was kind of attracting it unconsciously, not realizing it, because I didn't even understand that there was a better way,
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of just fell into it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being vulnerable about your past and your past abusive relationship, and, your childhood that was not necessarily very pleasant. So there's also, the fact that if you continue to do the same thing over and over, you'll continue to get the same results. If you continue to react to the same situation the same way repeatedly, you will continue to get the same results. So it's a break in the chain. And as you said, some people don't realize that they are attracting these really bad energies or these bad people, or that their trauma wounds haven't been healed to the point that they can open themselves up to more traumatic experiences. So self-reflection is really important, and self-analysis is very important when working with the law of attraction. Because if a person can't self-reflect, and if they can't be self-aware and figure out what they can do in this 3D reality, any type of manifestation work is going to result either in something negative, or it's just not going to work at all.
Right. I also found that having a role model as I, got older, I had a college professor, and I realized she was like the first really healthy example that I had of a person in my life that, she was physically healthy. She had a healthy relationship. She was kind, all about service to others. And having her as a role model helped me sort of change my mindset because I'm like, oh, well, I could be healthy, right? But I just didn't have an example. And so, how can I attract something, if I don't even realize that it exists? So, I actually look to her as like, she helped me just have something to sort of be like, okay, I want something similar to that. I want healthy friendships. I want to be able to like support myself financially. I want to have a spiritual life. And, eventually I kind of developed my own version, right, of what a healthy life looks like. But I realized, I just didn't have any goals really or any kind of thing to look forward to. So, I felt like it helped me kind of break out of, cycling back in. But it's hard when there's not a lot of role models. Like, if you don't have a good teacher or family or anything, like, what are you, it's like you don't realize that you're in a loop, so.
Yeah, and also breaking a loop or a cycle of trauma can be very uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, not to say that it's easy, but it's familiar to go back into the same pattern over and over and be with a partner that exhibits the same type of abuse or selfishness that a previous partner has shown. Sometimes it's more comfortable to stay in a familiar zone in a relationship, even if that relationship is very, very bad for you, whether it be with a family member that you feel you must speak with, even though they are highly toxic and abusive towards you, or in a really nasty work environment. And this is where also privilege comes in. Some people do not have the resources to be able to move out of their abusive home.
Mm-hmm.
Some people do not have the familial support. Some people do not have the ability to change jobs right then just because they want to. But most people in the modern world, and when I say modern world, I'm referring to the West, like Western Europe, the United States, all of North America, in a developed capitalist society, if you want to get a different job, can you? Sure. You can improve your life by doing so. But that's not necessarily the case for people in the global south or in very, very poor countries that rely on agriculture to survive. But the work environments are also very, very different. So that's why I'm saying it's really important to look at the law of attraction through the scope of who's privileged, who's underprivileged, who's not privileged at all.
Right.
And look at the scope of systemic racism, institutionalized racism, and a patriarchal society. And so it can be particularly difficult for people in the LGBTQ community, and that's only compounded if they're also a person of color, and that's also compounded if they happen to be a woman. All of these things make it harder and harder to break out of cycles of abuse and to attract the type of energy that you want. That doesn't mean that you can't be in a mindset to say, hey, I love myself and I have confidence in myself and I will get out of this. That doesn't mean that you can't put that frequency out into the world and try to attract that frequency. But it's very, very, very important to make sure you stay grounded and you look at the law of attraction through this scope, because otherwise you go into a very, it's your fault that you're poor type of mindset.
Right.
it's very important to try to look at the actual struggles that individuals face or groups of people face every day, and understand that different people around the world have access to different resources. So thankfully for you, you were able to go to college and you had this privilege to go to school and meet this professor. And it quite literally changed your life because it changed the people that you attract. But it's so imperative to understand that if you have the tools and the access, absolutely take advantage of it. And if you don't, it doesn't mean that you have to be doomed. But there is a realism that life is very, very, very hard for some people, and it probably won't get much better for some people around the world. So that sounds like a total drag, but it's just being realistic. So I'm very glad that you were in the position where you could go to school and literally use the law of attraction to, it's almost like you saw her and you felt her frequency and you're like, well, I like this.
Right.
I want to match this frequency and then bring in the energy that she brings in.
Right.
And you've made this beautiful family and you have this beautiful home and you know, you're doing this podcast that's getting international attention. So go Astral.
Right.
Right.
You know, but it was like layers of like, you know, shifting out of this vibration, bringing this one in. And eventually I started tweaking it to where it was my own, you know, kind of unique vibration. But I did have to like latch on to some other people to get that, okay, what does it feel like, you know, to rise above this one? And like, it's almost like I needed these examples to know like, okay, this is even an option, you know?
Yeah.
Like I didn't even know. Like, it's just, you don't have it, you know, it's not on the TV, you know, maybe a storybook character every now and then you're like, oh, I kind of like what she's doing, right?
Yeah.
And so I would kind of like latch on to certain characters and things like that because I'm like, okay, well, they seem happy and positive and maybe I could, you know, switch this off, be a little, you know, more like this other person. But eventually I tweaked it and I do feel like I'm a lot more mindful now, you know, about like, oh, this person is, you know, coming into my energy field. They're lower. I don't necessarily have to lower myself to meet them. And I'm more like aware of like when that's happening now, which I wasn't. I mean, I was just kind of ignorant on it, right? So how does manifesting play into working with the law of attraction, and how can people manifest the things that they want?
Okay, so I'm going to preface this by saying we've talked about the framework. We've talked about the inequality. I'm going to speak on this assuming that most people have a certain level of access. Okay. So because we have acknowledged major issues that people on YouTube don't talk about when they discuss the law of attraction, which is just amazing to me to think that everybody has the same access when they simply don't.
Right. And people might be like, oh, I'm just not doing it right, or I'm just not good enough at this or something, you know, instead of being like, well, I have different circumstances working against me that I have to sort of peel those back first before I can get to this positive mindset, you know?
Yeah. You know, the global north does not contain the only people on the planet, I guess is essentially what I'm saying.
Right. It's good to acknowledge the whole collective.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Because if you think about it, isn't that the main focus of what all of us woo-woo people talk about? Is the whole collective, but then they don't talk about the people who don't have as much privilege.
Right.
So I'm going to answer this assuming that everyone has a certain level of access. Okay. So since the law of attraction is always working, it means that the law of attraction is also always manifesting whatever frequency or energy you're putting out into the world. And once you put out that frequency, whether it's on purpose or like you've mentioned, you know, totally subconscious without your knowledge, it becomes an externality. And that externality can manifest itself in either desirable or undesirable ways. And we've talked about a few examples of that already. Some very real world examples. So as far as how people can use the law of attraction to manifest things that they want, like consciously and actively and purposefully. So an individual can have control over the manifestation that if they put out the correct types of frequency. And that sounds very abstract because it is very abstract. Over centuries, people have believed in good luck charms, superstitions, prayer, anything that could bring positive energy to themselves, such as healing or money, or to simply prevent harm, which is what a lot of people use prayer for. Someone gets into a car accident and then they pray that the person ends up being all right. And also, as a side note, I'm using the term prayer as a very ubiquitous and universal term with no attachment to any particular religion or deity. Just to make that very clear. So because otherwise I just feel like that's a word that needs clarification, since so many people associate prayer with certain religions.
Right.
So some people can manifest wealth, or they attempt to manifest wealth and stability by putting a copper penny in the left sole of their shoe is really common, because you receive on the left, and it's a penny, so it's a denomination of money, even if it's a small denomination of money. And copper is very grounding, so it keeps you balanced, right? Which sounds kind of funny if you only put a penny in one shoe. I guess you could put it in both, but sometimes people will draw sigils or symbols. Take like their business office, for example. They might draw in the air, or even physically somewhere in their maybe like in the corners of their office, like dollar signs to attract money. And some people will draw crosses on the windows of their planes to ensure a safe flight. There are so many different sigils and symbols that you can use in your life to attract safety, love, health, protection, prosperity. And people, I mean, it's kind of like, thankfully, we've gotten away from this notion that seeing a black cat is bad luck, when seeing any cat, I think, is a gift.
Right.
And sometimes you see cats because it's like, well, that cat looks pretty rough and I need to help it. And then it can be a very good experience for both you and the cat. But just an example of how some of those superstitions have changed over time. You don't hear a lot of people talking about walking under a ladder being bad luck so much anymore. Maybe in some parts of the world, maybe I'm just ignorant. So when you think of law of attraction, it's kind of, not only is it a working force all of the time, but there are these really like ingrained into society beliefs and symbols that you can use in your daily life without even really thinking much about it to gain prosperity or to bring certain types of energy to you. One very pragmatic thing that a person can do is if they have the resources to go to therapy, that's a fantastic way to bring good energy to yourself and to catalyze a significant amount of positive change if your therapist is good.
Right.
That's a whole other, we could do a whole podcast on bad therapists. We won't. but you know, working under the premise that the therapist is good as what they do, right?
Right. They help you kind of focus on what you want, because sometimes you don't realize what you want because you've never asked yourself.
Yeah.
So that was my big thing, is like I didn't realize what my own wants and desires were because I was just surviving.
Well, and also when you spend so much of your life really focusing on the wants and desires of other people, it can be very hard to focus on yourself and to explore any goals or any achievements that you might desire, right? Like might want to you might want to travel, but you've never sat down to really think about where you'd want to go. You just know you would like to travel. So, it's interesting when you get out of relationships with very selfish people or out of a very selfish familial household and you're out on your own and you're like, okay, I can do things that I want to do now. And then you're like, but what do I do? Or
Right.
if you're used to having, as a mom, you have your kids all of the time and you're like, but I want to travel, but what would I do if I weren't just taking care of my kids?
Right.
Even if it's for like a few days.
Right.
You're kind of lost, right? So that's a very interesting concept and kind of a conundrum to bring up as well. There's also, as far as like material ways to bring, prosperity into your life, and cinnamon is very, very popular. Everyone knows about salt to banish like bad stuff, right? But cinnamon is great for like, I know some people put it in their right palm because the right side is the giving side, and they blow it into their front door.
Right.
Like at the beginning of every month. And they essentially say, okay, well, my house is safe and it will be, a place of protection for me and a place of peace for me and my family, and my family life will be in harmony, and money will come into the house, and no one negative will be able to come past my threshold, that kind of thing. That's very, very popular. And that's something that's not even just seen in, the spiritual community. I mean, there are people in rural Appalachia that do all sorts of practices like that, right? Like you wash your floors and you throw your mop water behind your left shoulder, right? Like you toss it over your left shoulder. That's really common, even down here in the South and in rural Appalachia. Something that I do is I keep so bay leaves are known to bring about wealth and prosperity, and they symbolize always keeping money on you. Well, I have ADHD and I can't hardly ever remember to keep my debit cards on me. So I keep a bay leaf in the back of my phone case. That bay leaf is no competition for my ADHD. I forget my debit card often. I'm still forever trying to come up with solutions and ways to outsmart my ADHD, but I've failed an amazing amount of times. But it is a symbol of, this is something I want to approximate myself to. This is a goal I have to not leave my debit card at home. Please help me to not do that.
Yeah, it's like almost like a simple reminder.
Yes.
And then that reminder puts it, makes it more intentional, because you're like, oh yes, I do want to have my card on me.
Yes. And that's why, it's almost like, this is similar in the same vein, but some people put like a ribbon on their finger to remember to do something. Well, I put a bay leaf in the back of my phone case to remember to grab my debit card before I leave the house. So, one really, really good way to use the law of attraction is, let's say someone said something really nasty about you that hurts a lot. You write it down on paper and then you burn it.
Yeah.
And you just get rid of it. You can also take that paper and rip it up and flush it down the toilet. You can do either thing. You can also write down on a piece of paper something that you really want to happen. And instead of saying that you want it to happen, because if you want it to happen, it will leave you wanting. So if you say, I am certain that this will happen, or this will happen, and you write it down on paper, and you can write it over and over again, or you can write it just once, and you can take the paper and fold it towards, so you're supposed to fold it towards yourself, and then you turn it to the right one time, and then you fold it towards yourself again, and then you turn it one more time to the right, so you get 3 folds, and then you fold it towards yourself again, and you can keep that in a safe place. You can put it under a crystal if you want to, whatever you might want to do. And that is one way that people like to use a material means of trying to connect with the law of attraction to put out the frequency of what they desire. So there are lots of different ways to do these things, right? There's also just simply, which is accessible to most everyone, is the power of positive thinking. It's literally just saying, hey, this is something I want. I'm good enough for this. This can happen in my life, and allowing it to happen. It is important to understand that the law of attraction doesn't necessarily work with your timeline. It will just sort of work however it needs to. And if you're really putting that energy out there, there could be some very, very uncomfortable transformations that can occur in your life, like you getting fired from a job that wasn't really great for you anyway, which being fired from a job might be universally seen as something negative, but not always, because that opens up space for you to do something better. And if you've been manifesting for a better job, then that just opens up the door for you to connect with that particular frequency. So I know I feel so woo-woo when I use the term frequency, but I don't have another way to put it.
I mean, it's scientific, like frequency, energy, all that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's real.
Yes, it is. I just wish that I had a way to measure that, so I could say,
Right.
look at these lines. This is the energy coming off of this person, and I wish that I could do that as someone who is at least pretty decent at law of
Right.
I would consider myself an expert in the law of attraction in the sense of the material means and manifestation techniques that a person can use to get things that they really, really want. And even somebody really, really good, you don't always get what you want all of the time, but you can say, I want more prosperity, and it will come to you. Again, given the physical location of where you live on planet Earth and your actual resources and the things that you're doing to manifest. So like if you're asking about a better job, but you're not either making connections and letting people know you're looking for another job, or if you're not actually applying for another job, it's very unlikely that you would find yourself in a new position. Right. So
it takes a little effort sometimes.
Oh, it takes effort. It takes effort in every sense, but because we have real 3D lives that we're living, we have to make the actual physical effort towards the thing, the goal. But we also have to be so confident that we can get there.
For sure. So what are your thoughts on spiritual bypassing? Do you believe that thoughts need to be backed up by action for this kind of stuff to work?
So what I believe is that, so spiritual bypassing is when a person, let's say somebody is a fairly advanced energy worker or psychic intuitive, and they have these natural gifts or these gifts that they've developed, and they're very advanced in that type of psychic intuitive way or as being an energy worker, but they do not have their shit together on a regular physical 3D basis. Like they're terrible with money. They're an alcoholic. They just aren't attracting the right kind of crowd in their own personal lives. That is spiritual bypassing. And it also goes hand in hand with denial. I see this a lot in yogis. So I see this a lot in the yoga community where you have these people who are fairly spiritually advanced and very in tune with their bodies, but not in tune enough to stop drinking alcohol, or at least to limit it. And now addiction is a disease. It's not a choice. That's a whole other topic. But being conscious enough and being self-aware enough to know if a person has a problem with a substance, or if they are a narcissist and are in denial of how they treat other people. You see a lot of really good and very talented practitioners who do not do the spiritual work to actually grow in such a way that attracts really, really good things to them. It's almost like a spiritually half developed person. So they might be beaming with light and totally great at Reiki, or, they might be a really good intuitive, but they just do not have themselves together on a very base level as a person. And that energy, which is a side note, that like unstable energy can transfer when you're doing energy work on another person. I don't want someone who doesn't have their shit together to work on me, because whether they realize it or not, they're going to be throwing that energy out at their client. There are also people who are so into the ethereal and exploring the other side, and exploring their spiritual selves, that they don't take the time to see how they are truly treating other people. And they don't take the time to see that maybe they are gatekeeping, or they are no longer living in reality. And then unfortunately you get into a type of self-denial that it could take years and years of therapy for a person to get out of, but they won't realize something is wrong until they've lost all of their friends and their family members don't want to talk to them anymore, or the only friends they have are also very narcissistic and want to compete with that person. So I'm not sure if that's succinct, but that is an explanation of spiritual bypassing, or at least what I see as spiritual bypassing. And do I believe that thoughts need to be backed up by action for some of this to work? We did touch on that a little bit on the other question, but I want to kind of expand my answer. So you have to do the emotional work to be a better practitioner. You have to do the emotional work to be a medium and not take on any really nasty negative energy. You have to do that emotional work, or you will not reach your full potential. You just simply won't. And you certainly won't reach your full potential of how good and kind you can be to other people. This is a major issue in several spiritual communities. Not that I am the expert of all spiritual communities in the Western world, but I do know that I have talked to enough people and that I have involved enough to know that spiritual bypassing has become a really big issue, because there's also, and I say on the other side of the coin, quite literally, people who say, oh, I could do Reiki. I could learn how to do that. And then they do it, and it's only about the money, when that should be a tertiary means. That should be a tertiary reason to get into healing practices. And I also just simply do not believe that there are enough practitioners to tell you to go to an actual doctor. You can have, I said this the last podcast, I'm sure, you can have the best of both worlds. This is kind of a side note. You can have the spiritual, and you can look at your body holistically, like spiritually and physically. And you can have a Western and Eastern medicine, but a lot of practitioners will not tell you that, especially if they're doing spiritual bypassing and especially if they are not grounded, because sometimes you just need antibiotics, right? So like sometimes you do. And also with spiritual bypassing, some people believe that they have it all figured out. Congratulations to them, I guess. I don't have it all figured out. I feel like I very much don't have it all figured out.
Right.
But like, I think it's really important to stay humble. And if you stay humble and you can be open to the fact that you're not the best ever, you can be confident that you're pretty good, but understand that you're not always the best, and be accepting of what other people have to say, like maybe other advice that is meant in a kind way, advice that is meant to build you up and help you and critique you in a positive way, and not from someone who just wants to bring you down. If you can be open to good advice meant with good intentions, then that can also make you a better practitioner and lead you away from spiritual bypassing. But if enough people tell you that you really need to look at yourself, it's probably time to look at yourself and figure out why you're not attracting the things that you've set out to attract, because it could be sometimes the common denominator is the problem, right? That's a hard one to ignore. And this leads me into wanting to talk about imposter syndrome.
Okay. Let's explore that a little bit.
Okay. So I had a conversation with a colleague recently who got into this new position at work, and this woman is just fantastic. She's in her early 20s. She's really, really intelligent. She has all of these people at work telling her like she is just the best, right? She is so good at what she's doing, and she's just going to get better. And this girl can, and I say girl intentionally because that's how she views herself, when to me she's not as confident as she needs to be, but she's a grown woman. And she says, I really don't know if I'm that good. And so spiritual bypassing is kind of like when you really feel like you're the best ever, but maybe you're not. I guess is a good comparison to imposter syndrome, when the person experiencing imposter syndrome is constantly humbling themselves and is open to being wrong. And they're constantly questioning whether they are good enough for the position that they're in, or if they're good enough for the family that loves them so much, right? Or if they're good enough for the friend group that's so supportive. And imposter syndrome, I think, is a really brilliant, like, example of a person who truly is good and has done a lot of emotional work, not all of it obviously, but has done a lot of emotional work, and is genuinely a good practitioner, a good engineer, a good professor, a good insert position, right? Or is a really amazing family member that deserves to be supported. So that's my view on imposter syndrome and how it works practically. But it is, in a nutshell, someone who doesn't feel like they are fit for the job that they have been selected to do. Despite all of their qualifications, they still have self-doubt. And at some point, you do grow out of imposter syndrome. And for some people, it can take years. It's kind of a barrier that they can't see over, and they can't see their full potential. And that barrier kind of gets lower and lower and lower. And then one day they can just sort of step over it and say, I am good at my job. I might not be the best, but I'm pretty damn good. And I'm pretty confident. I experienced a lot of this when going into the public arena with readings again, and I experienced a tremendous amount of imposter syndrome for probably the first 6 months of doing animal communication work and medium work. with the public. And I realized, okay, it's just really important to stay humble. It's okay to be confident in myself. And it's okay for me to be wrong sometimes, because then I can learn. And then I realized, as I had more and more experiences with people and their animals and whatnot, that I'm confident enough to say, I'm pretty good. I'm not the best ever, but I'm pretty good. And a lot of other people think I'm pretty good. And that common denominator, once again, right? So the common denominator does not just exemplify maybe the problem, but it can exemplify something really good to believe about yourself as well, right? Like it can provide you have to do the introspection, but it can provide the subject of that introspection. So have I lost all my friends? Am I pretending to be a lot better than I am? Am I being narcissistic? That's a common denominator. Are all these people telling me I'm really, really good? Do I have a really wonderful and loving and supportive family that sometimes I feel like I don't deserve? Those kinds of things. That's also a common denominator. Now, side note, there are plenty of wonderful people out there who do not have loving and supportive families. So I am not making a connection between having that type of family and being worthy. That isn't the connection I'm making. It's more of like, does my friend group think I'm great? Does my family think I'm great? Do my colleagues think I'm great? I must be pretty all right. So, and that's kind of like gaining the self-confidence to jump over that barrier that is imposter syndrome.
Right. And realizing, confidence isn't a bad thing, and self-love doesn't make you a narcissist. And, there's a balance with all these spectrums. And I think sometimes when you're around people that have demeaned you for so long, and then you start being confident, you're like, oh, am I being like self-indulgent now? Am I like obsessed with myself now? And I'm like, I feel like you have to be okay with like cheering yourself on and like supporting yourself and loving yourself, and realizing that doesn't make you self-obsessed. You can still love, as long as you're still loving other people and you're still, here grounded and not just, okay, I'm the only one that matters on earth now, you're okay,
Yeah.
But I feel like when you're confident, some people are like judging you for that. And then it makes you be like, oh, am I, and that's where it's that imposter syndrome. Like, oh, well, maybe I'm not that good, but it's like,
Yeah.
you're, sometimes it's the way people are reacting to you. And then it makes you start questioning like, oh, well, am I being too much now? Like, am I loving myself a little bit too much? But I don't know. I feel like that's where it gets a little tricky, but you have to have some kind of self-belief to attract the things that you want. You have to know that you're good enough to start manifesting the other things. So,
So, and I'll say this also about going, because it's related to what you're saying. So whenever I went back into the public arena and I started doing medium work on a fairly large scale, and animal communication work for the public, which I'd never done before, I am to the point now where if I'm in a room and I get a pain somewhere in my body that I know is not my own, if I feel an anxiety that I can look at and say, this isn't coming from me. If I get images or numbers, whatever it is that I see, and I see it really clearly, then I am confident enough to say, there is something going on. At a certain point, you just have to believe in yourself.
Right.
And it doesn't matter if you're a writer or if you're a teacher or if you're a mathematician, whatever. I guess with being a mathematician, it's a little more empirical and easier to figure out if you're wrong or right. But it's not as subjective. In fact, it's not subjective at all. But at a certain point, you just have to have the confidence to say, okay, I picked up on this, or I wrote this poem and I think it's pretty good.
Right.
And it's not narcissistic to be self-confident.
Right.
But it is narcissistic to act with hubris, which is what we want to avoid, because then we get into the very nasty zone that is spiritual bypassing.
Right. So you can have like a healthy ego without being egotistical.
Oh,
You know what I mean?
absolutely.
And I think that's where it just gets a little confusing because we just don't know. We're told, oh, ego is so bad. And I'm like, well, you know, it can completely control you at some point if you let it run the ship. But
Oh, yeah.
it's also, you know, protecting you. And, you know, you have to have a healthy ego to put yourself out there. So,
Yeah.
or you're just going to be like scared and fragile all the time. So it's almost like you have to develop that over time and be like, it's good to be confident. It's good to believe in myself. It's good to, you know, tell myself that I'm beautiful and that I'm healthy and that, you know, and that just, it takes a little time. Sometimes a little therapy helps you with that because you're like, oh,
Yeah.
this is good. Like, this is what healthy people do. You know, they have these beliefs about themselves. They look at themselves positively, you know?
Absolutely. They do look at themselves positively. And I, at one point, you know, had a therapist that, and I'm sure this has had to have happened to you too, because you are such a brilliant person. But I, at one point, had a therapist say, you know, it's okay to say that you're intelligent, right?
Right.
It doesn't make you a narcissist. It's okay to say that you're smart. It's okay to be confident in yourself.
Right.
It's all right to have priorities for yourself. You just don't ignore the priorities, you know, of
Right.
other people that you care for as well.
Right. It's balance.
It is balance. Some days it's more about you. If you're sick in bed, you know, then someone else can take care of the kids, right? They can fend for themselves. If they're like 10, they can make peanut butter sandwiches, you
Right.
know, for lunch while you sleep off a migraine. And so yeah, I know that's a little off topic, but I feel like it's also kind of relatable too. So what I think and how this relates to the law of attraction is just by saying, I'm capable, I'm worthy, I'm good at my job, I'm a good mom, I'm a good wife, whatever. And there are some people who can quite literally, and you'll get to this point maybe in your 40s. I hope it happens earlier though, where you can choose the energy that you let out into a room and how much attention you want drawn on yourself. And if it's a day that you really need to conquer, or if it's a speech that you need to go out and give, or if it's a theatrical play that you're, you know, going to be a part of or whatever, it's okay to turn your energy on and walk into a room and say, I own this fucking place. But you know, still like you can be humble and you can
Right.
have this power about you that's
Right.
totally magnetic. You can have that power about you and be so kind and empathetic and compassionate and not be a jerk.
Right.
So it's not hard to be a selfish person, but it can, you take on a lot more stress, I think, in general, when you try to take care of other people too much. But as you said, there is a balance. You can totally be so confident, but be the most kind and
Right.
compassionate person. My husband, he walks into a room, he owns that place.
Right.
It's everyone turns and looks at him. It's the energy that he brings out. And this man has relentless, bottomless empathy,
Right.
but he also cares about self-preservation.
Right.
It's okay to have both.
Right. Be kind to yourself and be kind to others.
That's the easiest. I could have just said that.
Right. The records, I've been working with the Akashic Records on this, and it's funny because for a long time, I would put others first, and they were like, you realize that when we say all, we mean you too. But it took me a long time to be like, I'm equally as important as the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And so if I'm sad and sick and depressed or whatever, then it's okay that I love myself the way that I'm loving others. But it took me so long to get to that point. But I would be like setting my intention for others, and they were like, we would really like you to set that intention for yourself
Yes.
right now. We want you to focus on yourself right now. And it was like I almost needed that permission to be like, okay, I get it, because I am a part of the all. So
Yes.
I matter. And if I'm in a really crappy place, I'm actually affecting the collective. But when I'm happy and healthy and loving everybody, then I bring up the whole energy of wherever I'm at. So
There you go.
it just sometimes it takes you, looking at it from these different perspectives before you realize, okay, well, I matter because I'm a part of it all.
Yes. And you can magnetize. We get back into magnetizing things to ourselves, right? And just drawing in that kind of energy. I have a friend, she's an engineer, and she tells me that, she works with these, it's a male workplace because she's an engineer. And she says, well, over the last, few months, she's seen more and more people, these big burly dudes or these very techie men who have crystals near their laptops at work.
Yeah.
Right.
I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. And it's just her energy and bringing that into her workplace and everywhere she goes. Right. So again, the law of attraction, I heard someone once compare it to gravity. I'm not sure if in a way, in the sense of that the law of attraction is always working, like how gravity is always working, I could understand that comparison through that scope. But the law of attraction is always there.
Right.
So if you can figure out what you want, and again, when I talk about frequency, I'm not trying to speak on numbers, although some people claim they have specific frequencies and numbers to attract certain things, which might be real. I don't know. But if you can figure out what it is that you want or what it is that could really improve your life or improve the life of the people around you, and you align yourself with that belief and you just have this confidence that, yes, this can happen for me and this will happen for me, whether that's writing it down or whether that's, you blowing energy or blowing cinnamon into your home, like literally having something physical like you're blowing good energy into your home. Again, that's very, very popular. That's a very popular method of, trying to align with the frequency of prosperity. If you have the confidence in yourself, you can really do great things regardless of the law of attraction. But if you align yourself with whatever frequency that you want to approximate yourself to, like much better friends or a very loving partner, whatever it may be, I really believe that people, every person is powerful. Some people are much better manifestors than others, but I really believe that all people have an innate power within them to change. Again, the framework of the lack of resources and the racism and the different constraints that different people have to deal with. So I'm still acknowledging that, but also just speaking on I hate to say base level, because again, not everyone has access to all of these types of tools, right? And not everyone is in the mental space to believe, which is another tool, the mental space to believe in themselves, which is why we talked about like self-denial and spiritual bypassing and imposter syndrome. But assuming someone has at least some amount of resources and some amount of access, I really believe that people can do great things with the law of attraction and really attract good things to themselves.
Yeah, yeah. So, thinking about like the cinnamon and stuff, do you feel like people's beliefs, change the way that they're manifesting? Like if they don't believe that the cinnamon's working, or if they really believe that Mondays always suck, like does that tweak it a little bit? Is belief necessary?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. That's what it's all about. It's about aligning your thoughts and aligning it's weird to say this. It's about aligning your thoughts and your certainty that something will happen, and then allowing the law of attraction to work to make it happen and manifest as an externality. So once it leaves your mind, right? And you put that out into the universe and you say, this is going to happen and I'm going to make this happen. And then you're doing the work every day to be kind, and you try to be patient, which I am still working on. And you, I am not the most patient person on the planet. And if you're doing the work of, just making sure you keep house with your friends. You keep really good friends around. People who don't plan on using you or have no attention to. If you're doing that daily stuff and really, for lack of a better term, keeping your shit together, then all of that, the certainties that you throw out into the universe that you say are going to happen, they can come back to you. I do really believe that. Again, looking through the perspective of social constraints and economic constraints and inequality. And I also believe that the more love and kindness that you put out into the world, it can make it, as you were saying, you're part of the all, right? So being aware that you can make a major difference in the world, even if it's in just one person's life, well, that is still so significant to that one person, or a dog or a cat or a horse or whomever, right? It's really about bringing love and kindness and understanding to the world and not getting caught up in your own hubris, which again circles back to spiritual bypassing. But
Right.
to answer your specific question about, can saying something like Mondays suck can that lead to Mondays sucking? So since the law of attraction is constantly working, if a person is stuck in a rut and they're always saying that Mondays suck, they probably will, because they've already gone into the Monday with that mindset. If you already go into your day and decided when you woke up or even the day before, that it was going to be a bad day, there really isn't that much you can do to change that. And if something truly magnificent happened on that day, it would still not be as good or as magnificent as it would have been if you hadn't predetermined that your day was going to suck. So I hope that answers the question. So it's like, I am always going to be very poor. Well, that might be the case for a whole lot of people. And it really is probably the case for a whole lot of people. But assuming we're talking about, again, the developed world, the global north, that sort of thing. If you talk about, always being poor and you're working class, like, yes, you still have all these constraints, but that doesn't mean that you do, in fact, have the inability to gain prosperity or wealth or health or whatever it might be. And it might not turn out to be as grand as you want it to be all of the time, but there is a certain level of economic stability that every person has to be okay mentally and physically. And let's say this. So universal health care is really, really needed in the United States. And manifesting as a collective for that, not only with our thoughts and not only with aligning ourselves with the frequency of health, right? But aligning ourselves with the frequency of action. So going out and voting, actually taking the time to care, right? Actually taking the time to care and to vote. Those things can lead to actual manifestations. Now, I don't know about in the United States, and I don't know if we will see that for a long time, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't aim for it. And I don't want the takeaway of this episode to sound like, well, you can try, but it won't always work. But the reality is in life is that you can try and you can aim for things and it doesn't always work. And then sometimes it works so good, you don't even understand how it ended up working out so well for you. So the takeaway is, regardless of, you might not become a millionaire, but if you find yourself with a little more change in your pocket and better friends, then I'd say that the law of attraction is working for you.
Right.
And it has a cumulative effect over time. It just compounds and gets better.
Right.
I believe anyway, because if you've already discovered, okay, if I have myself together in this way and I keep acting in this way and good things have already happened, then good things will continue to happen. And that might sound commonsensical, but it is amazing the amount of people who don't understand that there are really simple things that they could do every day to attract better things into their lives that they just totally ignore. Just like keeping that bad friend around because she says racist things sometimes. Maybe cut her off, right? Cut her off. What do you need her for?
Right.
So that shitty uncle, you don't have to go to Thanksgiving, right? Have a Thanksgiving at your house instead. Don't invite him. Don't feel bad for cutting people out of your life that are not good for you.
Right.
And that is also very intertwined with the law of attraction.
Yeah. And I was also thinking, prosperity looks different for different people, So for me, prosperity is not being a millionaire. And maybe being a millionaire wouldn't always be prosperous because maybe it'd be too much of a good thing. Maybe you would, start eating really unhealthy or start doing drugs because now you can afford it, or, and become extremely materialistic. And maybe that wouldn't be prosperous for that person.
Yes.
And it's almost like your soul kind of knows, And so it's like maybe being prosperous is, waking up every morning to, health, and your bills are paid, and, you've got a little surplus to go enjoy, time with your friends. Maybe that's what prosperity looks like for you. That's the healthiest form for you,
Yes.
So
exact. That's a really, really, really good point. I'm so glad you brought that up because so something like 50% of all people who win the lottery, like the big lottery, like millions of dollars, end up bankrupt within like 5 years.
Right.
It's like a ridiculous amount of people. And honestly, that 50%, that could be a lot higher now.
Right.
But people get this, money is power. They get it in their heads. They use it. They get horribly addicted to drugs, which again is a disease, not a choice. And they just spiral out of control. They overspend. And so you're right, prosperity and wealth, they look so different for every person. Or they have the ability to, or the capacity to. So I totally agree.
Right.
I think most people, their ideal life would be to have a reasonable work schedule and plenty of time to do things that they would like to do and have money to do a few extra things, and travel sometimes so their soul can experience new things, or maybe places they've been before that they don't remember in this lifetime. So you're right. It does look very different for a lot of people.
Right. So I feel like that almost for me would be more of a goal than, I just want to, attract a bunch of money.
Yeah.
There's certain times, like if I'm low on money, that I would maybe specifically focus on money. But for the most part, like to me, health is wealth, and
Absolutely.
happiness and peace are way more important to me, than becoming some celebrity. You think of all these celebrities, they're having mental breakdowns. They got all this money. They're stressed. There's all sorts of mental health problems with rich people.
Yeah.
And so it's not, money doesn't necessarily equal happiness. So
No.
there's, that balance with everything. And you're not necessarily doing it wrong just because you're not a millionaire.
Well,
right?
there was this, exactly. And there was this study done that, and I should know this figure, but it's something like, I want to say it's over like $80,000 a year doesn't impact an individual's happiness. like the net income. And I believe that's for a family of 4, which seems kind of low, but, and I would really have to look that up. I don't want to quote that, but it is something like if you make at least 80 grand and you're in the United States and you're living in like the Midwest, or like the Southeast, not like New York or LA, because you couldn't survive off that, right? That amount of money, anything above that is just like, well, okay, retirement fund or
Right. You're
whatever.
investing it. You're not even seeing it really.
So money affects happiness, but to the extent of, I would be so unhappy if my electricity were not on. And other than that, and other than being able to supply food for your children or for yourself, how much excess, how many yachts does a person need is the real question.
Right.
Right. So when you work with the law of attraction, you have to be very realistic, but understand that it does come in different forms. The universe kind of knows what you need if you will ask.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe for some people, it's no longer having, like a respiratory illness. Maybe they don't get sick as often.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's no longer having migraines. Maybe it's being able to work like 2 days a week, right? Or whatever. And just really being able to explore a hobby,
Right.
whatever that might be. So thank you for bringing that up, because I was speaking in these abstract terms and you really brought it down and you're like, hey, let's talk about the differences in prosperity and wealth. And it's like, well, yes, ma'am. Let us do this.
Right. I'm glad I could ground it a little bit and give some examples too.
Oh, absolutely.
So my last question is, do you have any advice for people who are working with the law of attraction, but they are not getting immediate results?
So you did a lot of answering of this as far as what the results might look like. And what I will say is very rarely in life do we get immediate results that we really, really want. It takes a lot of work. This question is kind of the culmination of the other questions. It takes a lot of work to get out of a really nasty relationship, and a breakup might be this horrible thing, or it might feel like this awful, awful heartbreak, and then boom, you're free.
Right.
And you've healed. And it might take a long time, but maybe that's what you were using the law of attraction to do, was to bring in, like I mentioned earlier, a very loving partner. Well, the old partner might have to go then. Mm-hmm. Or it might mean that your current partner becomes more loving. This is a note to not expect a narcissist to change, but we're talking about people who are at least decent people and have the capacity for change, right? Mm-hmm. So what I will say is, if you have something that is really, really important that you really need to put a lot of energy towards, and you have the confidence to be able to do this, I would say one way, and this is purely a method, one way to manifest would be simple white tea light candle, sprinkle some cinnamon on top of it, say this will happen.
Right.
Over and over. And a lot of the time that can be very, very grounding. Let it burn down all the way. Don't blow it out. And just see if it happens. If you have a lot of wax left, the energy's probably not fully out there. You might have to do it a second time. But I would only do that if you're really, really confident. Again, people who are not necessarily very spiritually aware can have some really nasty things happen if they do any type of candle work. Mm-hmm. And they're not aware of how to speak, or the fact that maybe how they treat other people, they could get some karmic, payback, as it were, depending upon what they're trying to like manifest, right? But if it's something as simple as, I will get a much better job that's a lot higher paying, by all means, get a little tea light candle, sprinkle cinnamon on it, do the work. If I have a friend going through an adoption, and And, I've told her so many times, it's like, get you some tea light candles, work about 3 days before the full moon, and say that you will be able to adopt this child over and over and over again, and do it about a month before your court date so your moon can fully cycle and slap that energy into that courtroom. Does this work for everybody? No, but candle work in general tends to be fairly effective for a lot of people. But as far as not getting immediate results, again, a little self-reflection can go a long way. If you're not getting the results that you want and you feel like you should be getting a lot better results, it's really time to look at yourself and say, what am I doing on a 3D physical level that is not allowing me to grow spiritually? What am I doing that is not allowing me to be healthy? Is it because I work in a really nasty work environment? And now I am also, again, going to use the scope of ableism. A lot of people in the spiritual community don't talk about the fact that some people are born with different, like a lack of capability, right? Or certain, like maybe bone deformations or whatever. But so we're talking about, people who maybe don't generally get sick, but now they're sick all of a sudden. Well, you might want to look and see, why is my body feeling the way it is? What's going on in my life right now? And then using the law of attraction to kind of get you out of that. See what's going on a physical level first. Maybe there's mold in your house.
Exactly. Like maybe the negative things that are happening, or that doubt that's trickling in, it's because you kind of need to recalibrate a little bit. And so it's sort of like, you need to shift it, maybe focus on this other thing, and that would actually be more beneficial, right? So when I just have been dealing with health stuff. So something I've been doing to kind of get out of the stinking thinking is every time I had like a doubt in myself, I would say 5 positive
good
affirmations. 5, and I'm like, at that point, I have tipped the scale. I'm focusing on what I want, and it's okay to have doubt sometimes. I feel like that's a human thing. Like, we're not perfect, Sometimes the crappy thing happens, and you're like, oh man, I must have really messed up. And it's like, don't get too stuck in it, and continue to focus on, what do I want? How can I work with this energy to manifest what I want, and not just be like, wow, I really suck at manifesting, right? Like,
yeah.
Because you can kind of if you start doubting, then that actually is going to lower the vibration.
And that's when Mondays always suck.
Right.
And then your Mondays can never be good. Right. So that's really awesome that you say 5 things to kind of counterbalance the negative thing that's happened, right? Or maybe some self-doubt. If you don't have some self-doubt, then you're probably too arrogant.
Right.
Right. So even in very, very confident people, they'll run into something where they say, well, I don't know about this. Maybe I should get some advice.
Right.
Like, you can be confident and still ask for advice. You can be confident and not claim to be right about everything, because that's the territory of hubris. And that is what spiritual bypassing can slip down into.
Right.
Is just total arrogance. So there's no like scientific method for manifestation, but every person has had an experience where they've been around someone and they felt horrible about that person. Something's not right with them. Something is not okay. And they feel that very, very, very low vibration. But that's the kind of vibration that we put out when we bring in nasty people into our lives. So it's really, really important to understand, okay, well, if you've had an experience where you felt something bad, think about when you've been around somebody that's a total light being and it's like a sunshine person. And now match your frequency with that. You're probably going to have to stop going to bars.
Right.
Right? Like, try the library.
Right.
But I mean, really, there are people. There's this girl that I know who is desperately trying to help other people all the time, and she is an alcoholic and she just can't get out of the rut, and she doesn't see that she brings in really nasty people that put her in this bad mental state to where she drinks again.
Right.
But she's really loving in all kinds of ways, and she could truly be like a sunshine person if she wanted to be. And I think it's absolutely ridiculous, by the way. And I say this as a person who is at least, I'm pretty cynical. I say this as a person who's pretty cynical. I think it is it really does a person a disservice if you tell them that they can't be like a sunshine, bright person all of the time. Clearly, no one is like just exuding happiness constantly, right? But like to have someone who's truly like confident and happy with themselves, and to try to bring that person down and say, oh, it's like you're living in a fantasy world or something. No, it's actually really okay to be really happy and feel really good about how you treat people and feel really good about the interactions that you have with other human beings.
Right.
And it's actually totally okay to be a sunshine person.
Yeah.
So, like, and if you want to think of the law of attraction that way, it's really, really okay to approximate yourself to be happy. And something that my therapist has told me so many times, and this, he's like, this sounds so cliche, but fake it till you make it. Just pretend like you have it together, and you will one day, because your body remembers that feeling. And every time he says it, he's like, I know this is cheesy, Kimmie, but hear me out. And he's right.
Right.
So if you want to, in one sentence, I guess say, what is the law of attraction? I don't know if this is exactly a way you could explain it, but in very layman's terms, just fake it till you make it.
Right.
Like, really, like my for real therapist was like, hey, this works for people. This is how people get in major positions of power within their companies, or, this is what politicians do. Politicians are not always great people, but there's a lot of malfeasance involved often in politics. But I always thought that was so cool. It can be as simple as saying, well, I know what I'm doing. Right. And then you experience the imposter syndrome. Right. And then you kind of
believing in yourself.
You start believing in yourself, but you do so without hubris.
Right.
Believe in yourself without hubris, and you'll be okay.
Yeah. That brought something up for me. Fake it till you make it. One of my exes, that was the abusive one I was talking about earlier, he always would try to insult me by telling me that I lived in a fairy tale world. And honestly, it was my belief in like the beauty of the world, and like, no, things can work out, that joy, that kept me going. And I eventually manifested a healthy relationship, but he didn't like it.
No.
Because he knew that he was going to have to go, that he wasn't going to be a part of that story. And so he would keep telling me, oh, you're delusional, you live in a fairy tale. And I'm like, why can't it be a happy ending? Why is a happy ending delusional? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's interesting because the more I focused on, no, my life can be happy. Like, there can be joy, Like, maybe birds aren't, like, singing around me 24/7.
They kind of are.
Right? But, I didn't let him shift that. I stayed in, no, I'm going to have a happy life. I will not allow myself to. And eventually my vibration shifted, and he had to go.
He had to go.
Because he was the only thing that was limiting me from living in the fairy tale, right?
Yes.
And now here I am. I mean, I'm not saying there's not roadblocks. I'm not saying there's not health issues that come up from time to time. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's me focusing on the joy, and the love and the beauty and all that. And it keeps me out of those crappy, lower vibrational states. And then I can actually heal and grow and manifest something different and something better.
And then you can help other people heal.
Right. and be just that example, just like that. My teacher was an example for me. When we're healthy and we're doing our bliss thing, and we're, people that are in those states might be like, oh shit, like I could probably do some version of that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that existed.
Yeah.
Right. And so we lead by example just by being happy and following our joy. Then we give other people that permission and say, no, well, everybody could, do some version of this. Now, what makes me happy might be different than what makes someone else happy. But, we can manifest that if we put enough time and thought and really believe in it.
Oh, absolutely. And something that, and I might have mentioned this to you. I don't think I mentioned this in the podcast before, but I did mention this to you, like on a personal, like during a personal conversation, that I'm currently in my Elle Woods stage, right? So, and now that the Barbie movie has come out, I have so many pink things. I was already accumulating all of this like baby pink and like these like fun like purple pastels and these also like these jewel tone clothes and stuff. And when I wear them, I feel so good.
Right.
And like just all of these like little pink crop tops and they make me so happy. Right. And so it's like, I don't know. I mean, I'm in my early 30s and maybe some people think that's immature, but I don't really give a shit.
Right. If it's making you happy, if it's,
Yeah.
And colors are vibrations, So
Yeah.
if you feel great when you wear a certain color, well,
Go for
wear
it.
it more.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if you feel like crap every time you wear the, beige, maybe burn all your beige stuff.
Can we do that anyway? Can we make a pact? Like if I join a coven, that's all we'll do.
No more beige.
No more beige, not on walls, unless you're in an office building. And even then, does it have to be beige?
Right. At least put some art on
Something.
top of the beige.
That's not word art.
Right.
We don't do word art. So we're banning beige. We're banning word art. And Modern Farmhouse is on its way out. Yeah. So if that's it, that might have been the most controversial thing that we've said, either of us, this whole episode. There are going to be people who unsubscribe because we've banned Modern Farmhouse.
That's so funny. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come back on the show. It's been really great chatting with you again.
Absolutely. And I guess also I should tell people how to find me.
Oh, yes.
That's really important. It's self-promotion.
Yes.
This is where I use the law of attraction to gain more money.
Yes, please give us all the ways to find you, contact you, and support you.
Yes. So I'm actually really bad at social media, but I do have a Facebook page under Flapjack's Curios and Readings by Kimberly. Mm-hmm. But I'm terrible at keeping up with it. So the best way to reach me is either flapjackscurios@gmail or 865-224-6858. I offer animal Reiki, human Reiki, intuitive readings, and medium work. I can do any of these things remotely. I also see people local to Knoxville in person, and I do parties. Halloween's coming up, so I have a lot of things going on with that. And yeah, you can email me, you can call me, you can also connect on Facebook. One day I will make an Instagram. I will probably never make a Twitter now that all of that has happened to Twitter. But yeah, I do offer remote readings and in person, and it's a good time. I like to connect with people. I used to not like to connect with people. And doing this kind of work has made me a lot more optimistic towards people. And I've realized that helping other people it's really, really good. Mm-hmm. It's a really good feeling. And I try to do it as altruistically as possible. Mm-hmm. It's actually quite nice. So yeah, again, law of attraction, bringing in good stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Put out what you want more of.
Exactly. See, I thought like I worked for a large retail company, and I thought that ruined me forever with working with the public. And then I started doing this for the public, and I was like, oh, I like talking to people.
Right.
Like, I like it.
Yeah, you want that vibration, to be a positive, not just people that hate their job and, that are in those loops. Because you don't want to get stuck in those loops by being around that all the time.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you again for coming out. This has been great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yes. And thank you all for tuning in. Check us out next time on the Astral Hour.